What's up, guys? This is Zach, and you have just stepped into the dark blue. I am super thrilled to be hanging out with Connor Beaton today, author of Men's Work. If you haven't checked it out yet, get on Amazon, order yourself a copy. It's going to change your life. I can guarantee it. Connor, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, brother. I appreciate you having me here and the endorsement. And yeah, I'm excited to jam with you for a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, those that are listening know I like to enjoy a beverage while I do the episodes. So today I'm having one of my go-to kombuchas from Kirkland, of all places. It's from Costco, so it's an organic lemon ginger kombucha. So just usually a good way to get my day started, but I'm about halfway through now. So
Nice. Get in there. I dropped
yeah,
the ball. I dropped the ball on the I have a mason jar of water, which is my
hydrate,
hydration
man.
of choice when I'm doing interviews all day.
That's totally understandable. A lot of too much
Yeah.
talking, all that cotton mouth otherwise. No.
Yeah.
So, but do you have a favorite beverage that you like to enjoy?
I really like kombucha as well. I have been completely sober now for it's going to be 3 years here soon.
Nice, man.
And so I really like my wife and I got her on the sobriety train as well. And we're not so strict at like never anything. Like we just went to this omakase in the city and had like a traditional Japanese dinner and had a little bit of sake to go
Oh,
with the
cool.
meal. But usually I'll have like Athletic Brewing. I still like a good IPA once in a while, and
Hmm.
it's non-alcoholic, and so I'll have their IPA. I think it's like I can't remember what it's called. They have like the freeway or freeways or something like that. It's like a hazy
Free, yeah.
IPA.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
pretty
I like that. I like the IPAs that like give you a good punch in the face, you know?
solid. Just all the hops.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Yeah, man. We actually, like I was telling you before we got started, we actually dug into the non-alcoholic beer space quite a bit over the last couple of years to promote healthy relationships with alcohol through the into the dark blue. And I've found so many amazing non-alcoholic beers. Just there's so many options now because the demand is so much higher now than it used to be. So we're not limited to just O'Doul's or St. Pauli or something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean they almost like disincentivized, non-alcoholic beer before because it was so shit.
oh
And
yeah.
now, now it's like, no, that's some pretty good stuff. You can just drink some non-alcoholic beer and have a good night. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I'll often have a non-alcoholic beer with me at like gatherings with friends or something, and they won't even know I'm drinking a non-alcoholic beer because it's just looks like a normal craft beer. So
yeah.
they'll ask me about it, and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, go grab yourself one," and they'll be like, "Man, this is great." So hey, it works.
It's awesome, man. Yeah, sneak it in there.
So yeah, but hey, I'm really excited to talk about your book and your personal journey a little bit. And so I know we don't have a lot of time, so I want to go ahead and get into that as much as possible and get into the meat of it.
Hmm.
So I was wondering if you could start us off by just telling us a little bit about your journey. Your book talks a bit about your rock bottom. And so I'm kind of curious to hear about the space between rock bottom and men's work. So
Hmm.
what was that path like for you going from that to getting into the work you're in now with men?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my rock bottom was the trajectory into the work that I do today. And I had a very different career in the past, which I write a little tiny bit about. Almost not at all. It's more of like a mention. But, I was doing the classic thing that many of us do, which is I thought I had built a life that I needed to build in order to signal that I had become a successful man. I was traveling the world. I had this, gorgeous girlfriend. I had the motorcycle. I had the 5 liter Mustang. Like I had, not everybody dreams about a Mustang. I don't necessarily anymore, but there was certainly a time in my life where I was like 5 liter Mustang.
That's
Um, yeah, that's it. That's it. And so, I had done all those things and So on the outside, it seemed like I was living, this very sort of successful life. And behind the scenes, I was really struggling. I was really going through it. There was substance abuse, there was porn addiction, there was a ton of infidelity and cheating and lying. And, my internal world was sort of a mess. And all of that came to, a crashing halt. My girlfriend at the time found out that I had been having an affair, a few of them, and I was questioning leaving my career before that happened, and so I put a pause on my career.
Mm.
And I didn't want anybody to know. I felt pretty embarrassed. I felt a lot of shame about what I had done and the choices that I had made, and I had a lot of self-deprecation. And so I moved my shit into storage and moved myself into the backseat of my car for a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that really led me onto this journey, there's sort of two things, and I'll say them briefly. One was I had a mentor in my life. I was fortunate enough to have a mentor who took me under his wing, and he was well versed in Jungian psychology and NLP and cognitive behavioral therapy and Gestalt therapy and Buddhism and Taoism and Zen and all these wild
Nice.
things that I had never heard about before in my life. And so he sort of took me underneath his wing, and I spent the next 2.5 years in a very sort of traditional apprenticeship with him,
Cool.
learning about these different therapeutic and spiritual modalities.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing was that when I started to talk to men in my life about the shit that had been going on behind the scenes, um, I started to realize that the more transparent I was with them, the more willing they were to be transparent with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that really shone a light on how surface level most of my male relationships were.
Yeah.
That I knew a lot about the guys that were in my life, in the sense that I knew this type of scotch they like to drink and the women they like to date and the bars that they like to go to and the cars that they wanted to drive, the music they like to listen to. But I didn't know how their marriage was struggling, and I didn't know how their mental health was suffering, and I didn't know that they were dealing with some trauma, or that their business was falling apart. I didn't know these like very consequential things.
Yeah.
And so it really got me present to how a lot of my male relationships were lacking in depth. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to see that in a lot of men's lives. The more that I sort of poked around, the more that I was like, oh, this is a very common thing for us as men, that we just
Mm-hmm.
lack depth and real substance in our relationships, but we're all craving it, like we
Yeah.
all want
No,
it.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those two things were really the big thing. It wouldn't be until later, years later, that I would start Man Talks and start my organization and the work that I do today.
Mm-hmm.
But those were the sort of two catalysts that led to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Man, that's so true. A couple summers ago, I actually did a tour for our organization around the country, and I talked to men all over the country, people I had never met before. And when they found out I was there talking about mental wellness and all of that sort of thing, they would approach me and just word vomit everything going on in their lives.
Mm.
And it was amazing to see how, given the permission and the space to open up about these things that they're dealing with, how willing they were to do it.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. It's, I mean, like, I think transparency begets transparency. Like I said
yeah.
before, it's like when you're willing to move into, like, out of the normal rules of how we operate as men. Like in the book, I talk about the one rule of men, which is pretty similar to the only rule of Fight Club, right? Which is like, you don't talk about Fight Club.
Yeah.
And I think that rule kind of applies to men. It's like, the one rule of men is you don't talk about what it's like to be a man who's struggling or
Yeah.
suffering or feels weak or insecure or etc. And so I think that a lot of men need to break that rule, specifically with other men, and to be able to have some more open dialogue about the truth of what's going on in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
because we need to be challenged by other men. Like, male relationships have a utility to them that we often don't utilize. And
Mm.
that utility is being challenged by men that we respect. There's a really deep function to that we've stripped out of male relationships in Western culture. So anyway, that's a little bit of a big piece, but we'll
Yeah,
I'll pause
I
there.
was- I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get more into it here in a minute. So yeah, so you said years later you started getting into the work with men's work and man talks, all that. Did you just do a lot? Did you do a lot of just personal study in between that, or did you do a school path, or what was your personal route?
I love the mentorship and apprentice based approach.
Mm,
I think that um, the modern education system in many ways doesn't benefit men in a lot of ways. I think there's some good research that we start young boys in the education system too early, and they struggle because of it. And I think that a lot of men are avoiding going into college institutions today because they're sometimes not the best environment to be in,
yeah,
for a number of reasons. But I'm not opposed to, I have a degree, I have a bachelor's degree. It's just not in psychology.
yeah,
I found men in that field that I really admire and respect, and went and sat with them and learned from them. And so, like I said, I spent 2.5 years in an apprenticeship with my first mentor. I have since, apprenticed with a few men. Like I still do to this day. I'm still sort of sharpening that axe. Like in 2 or 3 weeks, I'm heading to Colorado to go and train with a mentor of mine that I've been working with for a couple of years, and he's 73, and he's been
wow,
doing Gestalt therapy and equine therapy and developmental psychology for 40 years.
wow, that's
And
cool.
he's just one of the most gifted practitioners. He's like this cowboy that lives off in the mountains
Oh yeah,
that's just been like healing people's lives for fucking 40 years. And so
yeah, that's awesome.
that's the path that I took. I've debated this for a long time, but academia maybe at some point I'll go and do a master's, but
Mhm.
I think I've built something pretty substantial without it. And
Absolutely.
so I like that apprenticeship base. I like that old school return to like go and sit at the feet of the master and learn from him,
Oh yeah.
and be the Padawan, and then become the Jedi at some point, right? Just to nerd out a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love that. That's makes a lot of sense, and that's a very great traditional way of learning. And I just think that's perfect. I think we have those one-on-one opportunities and can learn so much more from those. Just like you're saying, modern education systems are really, in a lot of sense, just to get that piece of paper and say, yeah, look, I did it. And so yeah, you'll learn things along the way, of course. And I have a bachelor's in business administration, and I actually just started my program for a master in counseling, just mostly for business purposes, because of what I'm doing in a nonprofit setting. I want to have that title. But I very much agree with you in that, a lot of times university doesn't really prepare us for the depths of what we're going to be doing. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
that's great. Well, I really appreciate that perspective. And I I had a couple quotes in the book that I really kind of in the initial chapters of the book, that kind of stood out to me as far as what you're trying to do with the book. And so the first one was the book is a map. This book is a map for those wishing to explore masculine darkness and learn how to integrate it into their own being, so they're not so controlled by it. So to start off, what monsters did you find in your own shadow when you started doing this work?
Oh man. I think I found a good amount of anger and insecurities.
Mm,
Anger in a lot of ways towards the men that I was surrounded by growing up.
mhm,
And whether that was their absence or their lack of involvement, or their abusive behavior, the impacts of their anger. And so I think there was a good amount of grief for what I experienced growing up that I've really started to realize that I lacked in a lot of ways with the really healthy male role models that I really wanted as a boy. Because I was wild, I was this wild kid. I'd go strip down in my underwear as a boy and go out into the backyard and like dig freaking holes and take the hatchet and try and chop 100-foot trees down. And
Yeah.
I was just like this
Nice.
wild child lighting shit on fire. And I
Feral.
needed, yeah, I mean, I needed some direction. And what I got was either avoidance or violence. And
Gotcha.
and so when I started to do this work, it was sort of riddled with these insecurities and fears, and kind of a fear to own my own anger, a
Yeah.
fear to sort of claim my own potency as a man and step into my own sense of power and own that in a way that wasn't egotistical or arrogant,
Mhm.
which I had done before in my 20s. I certainly was, I think if anyone had met me in my like early 20s, I was a pretty arrogant, cocky little bastard. And and yeah, and so when I started to dig, what I started to find was these insecurities about who I was, and was I good enough, and was I smart enough, and all those types of pieces, and what did women think of me, and all
Mm.
the stuff, would I ever amount to something? And so that, my relationship with money was buried in there,
Oh yeah. Wow.
so those are just some of the, I know I'm sort of being broad and general, but those are some of the things that I started to uncover.
Yeah. No, broad in general is totally fine. I mean, basically, it's really want to bring a general awareness to these things to anybody listening, so they get curious, right? Like
Yeah.
what's in the depths of this? What is the shadow, right? Which is actually my next question. So no, I was the other one is actually a quote that you put in here that I wanted to bring up, was that where a man's wound is, there his genius will be.
Mhm.
And I loved that comment so much. Just under in the idea of discovering our shadow and meeting it where it's at, right? So can you talk a little bit more about the shadow? What is it, and how do we discover that?
Yeah, I mean, the first line of the book is, a man's work begins in pain.
Mm,
And the reason why I said that is that either, there's a great quote that like, your pain has its own intelligence. And so either you begin to understand the pain that you've gone through and the impact that it's had on your life, right? The impact that having abusive parents had, or, a neglectful father, or, being bullied at school, or not being able to get dates with women, or having them constantly reject you, like whatever that pain is, you either need to learn to work with that pain, or that pain will work on you in your life. And so the shadow is, oftentimes when I talk with men about it, it's like the shadow is your hurt locker. It's where you put all the shit that you don't want to deal with and you don't know how to deal with, consciously or unconsciously, right? It's where you
yeah,
put
yeah.
your insecurities, your fears, right? Your insecurities around women, not being good enough in the bedroom, or whatever it is. Um,
Until
it's
that
where
shit
you
starts stinking from the shadows.
That's right. That's right. It's where you put your insecurities of not feeling like you're good enough with, with a woman, or
Mm,
in your business. It's your inner critic, right? That
yeah,
inner voice that's constantly shit talking you and telling you that what's wrong with you? Such a piece of shit. And,
yeah. You're
how
not
come
good
you
enough
can't
for
get this
this.
right? And
Hmm.
yeah. And so it's an amalgamation of all the things that we don't want other people to know about us, that we don't want other people to see, that we're afraid that if other people saw or knew, that they would judge us, or they would abandon us, or they would ridicule us, or something along those lines. And
Mm,
so, but the important part is that those are all parts of us, right? You
yep.
can't kill them off. You can't get rid of them. And so it's truly like living in a house with roommates, or people that you dislike, or that you're afraid of, or that you don't know how to deal with. And you got to
Yeah.
figure out, how do I build a functional relationship with these people,
Mhm.
before they burn the house down. Right. And so that's the shadow.
Mhm.
And the reason why it's so important. So like, the shadow was a concept that Carl Jung created back in the early 20th century. And he was giving a talk at Yale in 1937. He was giving like a series of lectures, and he was talking about the shadow. And he said the new man, he was referring to men in the early 20th century. This is right in the right before, right during World War II. He said the new man must bear the burden of the shadow consciously, for such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is wrong in himself. And if
Mm,
only he learns to deal with his own shadow, he's done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic unsolved problems, social problems of our day. And so, Jung is basically saying there, like, if you lack purpose, if you want to contribute something meaningful to the world, start to deal with your own shit.
yep.
Start with you, start with your shadow, start with your insecurity, start with the way that you talk to yourself and the way you treat yourself, start with the stuff that you've been avoiding,
Mm,
right? The texting women that you shouldn't be texting because you're married, right? Or the not getting the reports done, when that you're putting your job on the line, or not doing your fucking taxes, even though you're risking like some,
right.
some business, detriment, like whatever it is.
Yeah. As far
So
as not getting the oil done and oil changed in your car, it's one of those little things we put off for so long, and then the car breaks down, and it's just like,
that's
well,
it.
all right, now it's a bigger problem. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So the shadow is that part of us that we dislike and we don't know how to deal with necessarily. And usually what I say to guys is it's the part of you that you feel like you're always fighting with. And it's
Mhm.
the part of you that you feel like you're going to war with internally. And
Yeah.
it's the part of you that is causing shit, in your relationship, in your career.
Yep.
Because the other thing that Jung said is that the shadow will create an unconscious snag thwarting your most well-meant intentions. So
Mhm.
whenever you have a goal, whenever you're trying to achieve a goal, that shadow is the thing that gets in the way and sabotages you.
Mhm.
It causes you to hit snooze 12 times in the morning when you said that you're going to get up and go to the gym,
Yep.
right? That's the shadow. That's why it's so important that we face it.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I've been coming face to face with a lot of those in a way recently. Last couple of years, 2, 3 years, just really digging in and trying to figure out what's holding me back from certain things.
Mm.
And so I've been faced with those insecurities of being picked on when I was a kid, and these people pleasing habits that I picked up through religion and trying to keep my parents happy and all this stuff, that carried on through into romantic relationships and work relationships, things like that. And so that's been a big animal to face, but you know what,
Mm-hmm.
I'm becoming a better person for it. And it's made a huge difference in my life to actually look at those things and be like, okay, well, here is how I'm getting in my own damn way, essentially. So
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I would really want to emphasize is like there's gold in the shadow,
mhm,
right? And so, Jordan Peterson's talked about this, and I'll sort of say it in my own way, which is when we avoid parts of ourselves, it weakens us, right? And when we start to move towards reconciling with the parts of us that feel unruly and too much to handle, or that we're afraid of, or that we dislike, we actually start to develop more competency and more confidence within ourselves, because
mm,
we're actually confronting the parts of us that we haven't known how to deal with. And
yeah.
so, for example, I'll just give a quick, very sort of real tactical example. If you're a man that grew up in a household where, and I'll give sort of two options. One, your father was sort of violent and loud and had a, bad temper and was aggressive with his anger, or you
Mhm,
grew up with a mom who was, sort of hypercritical and always sort of had this low grade anger that's sort of pecking at you, incessantly and
yeah.
critiquing everything that everything that you do. There's a very high likelihood that you have relegated your anger into the shadow, that you actually, a lot of men, what they'll do in response to that is they'll disconnect from their anger because they'll see it as a danger, right? Especially with the fathers that are loud and violent and aggressive, or with mothers that are that same way.
Yeah.
And so what will happen is that later on in life, you will lack boundaries. You'll be soft. You won't be assertive.
Mhm,
People in your career will probably walk all over you. You'll get into relationships with women oftentimes that have a lot of anger, right? You won't know how to deal with it. You'll be shutting down quite a bit.
Yep.
And so what have you done with your anger? You've put it into the shadow. You've actually tried to discard it in some way. And so the goal is being able to reconnect with that part of you, with that anger that you've tried to avoid, and assimilating it into your personality, allowing yourself to stand up to your wife or your girlfriend and say, like, hey, listen, like, that's enough, or don't speak to me like that, or, I don't want to tolerate this type of conflict in our relationship.
Mhm.
Being able to let that anger have a seat in a healthy way in
Yeah.
your life. And there's a tremendous amount of gold in that, in the sense that you start to become more assertive, more well-rounded, and people can feel that, right? Because
Mhm.
there's nothing more dangerous than a man who's disconnected from his anger.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think that that's men who, you know, men who pretend like they don't have any hints of anger within them or violence within them, I think are
Mhm.
very dangerous men often.
Yeah, because they don't know how to control it when it comes up. And
Yeah, because they're completely unaware of it, right? And they often can't see it popping up in their passive aggressiveness, or
yeah,
they're shutting down and not willing to engage in any kind of conversation, with the people that are maybe provoking them or trampling on them.
yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I've been working on, is understanding that anger in myself. That's one of the most recent things that I've been working on quite a bit, is recognizing that and learning how to use it as a tool. And I've seen a couple different people in the men's workspace therapy space on line lately, talking about anger and using it as a tool, and using it to recognize when you're unsafe and when boundaries have been crossed and things of that sort. And those discussions have really brought a lot more awareness to that, and like, okay, well, maybe it doesn't feel like anger, maybe it feels like hurt, but it's showing up as anger. And how can I use it to benefit the situation.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think, just on that note, and then we can move forward, like
Yeah.
anger is a sign that either a boundary is being crossed or that we are crossing a boundary.
Hmm.
That something, that our partner has said something that has hurt us or embarrassed us or disrespected us, that something has transpired that we're becoming defensive about. So anger is useful, right? Reactivity is a little different, right? When we become reactive and we're trying to defend ourselves and we're trying to prove our point, and
Hmm.
we're attacking the other person, that reactivity, like, that's the shadow,
Yeah.
again, that's the shadow coming up. But our
Right.
anger of, like, I really don't like the way that you just said that to me, or I really, like, that feels disrespectful. That type of stuff is reinforcing a boundary, and boundaries teach other people how to treat us.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to be too rigid, in the sense that we become uh overbearing, and we don't
Mhm.
allow other people to be human.
It's
But
either
we
this
also,
or nothing.
yeah, we also don't want to be a freaking wet noodle and never stand up for ourselves, right? So, and that's not to shame anybody. It's just simply to, like, I've been on both ends of the spectrum. So
Mhm.
I'm this is from self experience.
Nice, yeah, and that's one thing I love, is that I do notice that you talk from that personal experience a lot, or it seems like you do anyway, and so it's much more relatable, honestly, in a sense, and in that way, and so yeah, I was gonna ask, have you ever? So one of my most favorite, like, recent reads over the last couple of years is the Shambhala. I don't know if
Mm.
you ever heard of the Shambhala, the Sacred Path of the Warrior. Um,
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
yeah, it's a great look into understanding basic good. That there's everything is inherently in its natural state good, and that it's basically, so you're trying to build and maintain perspective of the rising sun, and seeing everything from that, like, compassionate side of understanding, okay, well, where is this coming from? So if this is so hurtful language or whatever, defense, whatever, it's like, where is it coming from?
Mm,
And the first thing it talks about is recognizing that basic good within yourself, so you can then recognize that basic good outside of you.
mm. Yeah,
So
I mean, I think that's very good in theory,
mhm.
unless you're a man who is riddled with shame and guilt and uh and self-criticism and self-judgment and self-loathing,
Right.
and it like, yeah, I mean, I think after you've done a little bit of work, then you can probably get into that place. But I've worked with enough men to know that it like they I can hear like my 25-year-old self being like, yeah, but like the bad in me definitely outweighs the good.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And like, so yeah, I love that. And I just also want to recognize, because I think what it's really talking about is, the masculine core
Hmm.
of us is just the eternal present, right? It's the
Yep.
eternal now, and it's the constant of existence, and that the feminine is the ever changing of existence, right? That the
Hmm.
feminine is the expression of the ever changing now, and the masculine is the expression of the ever present now, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, I think to put that maybe a little less esoteric is like, we as men have a responsibility uh to be present in the moment, right? To
Mhm.
regulate, to ground. Like, one of the things that I've said to a lot of my clients in working with couples or working with men is like, your job is to outregulate your partner. It's to outground your partner. It's to be
Yeah.
more stable than your partner. Your job is to outground and outregulate your kids, your coworkers, your
Mhm.
friends. Like, make it your mission and start to see how your life changes. Not suppression, not emotionally disconnecting, not numbing out, not stuffing down,
Yep.
but true internal mental, emotional, physical regulation. And
Mm.
when you can begin to do that, your relationships and your world will start to shift, because it's very hard for people to stay dysregulated around somebody who's regulated. And I
Mm.
don't know if it'd be helpful for me to explain that term, but
Yeah, I'm sure it could be helpful for a lot of people listening. So if you feel free.
yeah, so the simplest way of defining regulation is like space of homeostasis, that your normal state, right? That when you're regulated, you're out of your sympathetic nervous system. So you're not sympathetic nervous system dominant, meaning that you're not stressed out, that your mind, your body, your nervous system, the neurochemicals being released in your body are not in the sympathetic dominant state, are not in the stress state, right?
Mm.
Because when you're stressed, you're releasing cortisol and adrenaline. Your breath rate per minute is elevated. Your heart rate per minute is elevated. And along with that comes a very busy mind. So that's a dysregulated state. And unfortunately, in our modern culture, the majority of men, but the majority of people, we're talking about men, the majority of men are just in a constant dysregulated state because they are constantly stressed. They're
Mm.
constantly running with a certain level of anxiety and fear and anxiousness and anger and frustration and overwhelm, right? Their systems are constantly overtaxed.
Yeah.
But when you're regulated, you are calm. Your breath rate has moved into a more normalized state. So what does that mean? It means that you're taking less breaths per minute.
Mm.
It means
Yep.
that you're not laboring to breathe. It means that your heart rate has gone down, right? And when your heart rate goes down, your nervous system responds to that, and your body starts to calm down. And so you actually feel more rooted and grounded into the present moment, into the earth, into your ability to handle tough situations, right?
Yeah.
Your kid, I mean, I have a 2-year-old, right? So like your kid, what happened to me this morning is like my kid was like throwing blueberries at the fucking wall. And I was like,
Like,
I'm like,
why?
I was like, this is a brand new house, dude. Like, you are screwing up my walls.
Why are you
But
making this decision right now?
right. But
Yeah.
being able to ground in that moment is the ability to just breathe and feel and move some of my consciousness away from the storm of my thoughts that are
Yeah.
like, why the hell is he doing this? And
Mhm.
and move deeper into my body and connect to the like, it's okay. Like, this isn't actually a problem.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
when I can begin to do that, I can bring that regulation into every situation. So
Mhm.
regulation is just your ability to maintain presence and consciousness
Hmm.
under any circumstance, right? And how that looks is in your mind, in your breathing, in your heart rate, and in your nervous system. There's some very clear indicators of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you share real quick a few tools people can use to start to do that more effectively?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'll say is, like, I wrote this book to be tactical. I
Hmm.
think one of the biggest things that I've seen in the therapeutic industry is that the therapeutic industry approaches men's work and working with men in a very feminized and female way.
Mm,
And so a lot of the content that's out there talking to men about therapeutic modalities is very much about how do you feel, and
mm,
just getting you to feel loved and safe and understood, which is a very feminine orientation,
right.
versus moving you towards a sense of competence and purpose and
Mhm.
mission and tactical action that you could take so that you know that there's progress happening. And so I wrote the book with a lot of work in sort of involved in it, right? So that
Yep.
you can go through, answer questions, do exercises. But
Yes.
one of the simplest ways to do it is, so if you just inhale through your nose for a count of 4, pause for a count of 1, and then exhale out the mouth like you're blowing through a straw, and let that be for about a count of 7, pause, and then inhale again through the nose. And if you just repeat that cycle in through the nose for a count of 4, exhale out the mouth through like pierced lips through a straw for a count of 7, what you're going to do within 2 to 3 minutes, you don't have to do this for very long, but what we're going to do is you're naturally going to slow down your breath per minute, which is naturally going to slow down your heart rate per minute. And
Mm,
by doing that, you're sending a signal to your brain to calm down the nervous system. And so within 2 or 3 minutes, you will what's called down regulate your nervous system and move into a more relaxed, calm state,
yeah.
right? Because when your heart rate's elevated, you're in a stressed out state,
Mm,
right? If you're sitting in a work meeting and your heart rate's at like 80, you're probably a little stressed out, right? If you're
yeah.
having a conversation with your wife and your heart rate's at like 90, you're in a stressed out state, right?
Yeah.
But if you're sitting there and your heart rate's at like 55 or 60, you're probably good. And
Yes.
so we can use the breath, because the breath is the dial between the sympathetic nervous system, which is the gas pedal, right? Go, 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 stress, cortisol, adrenaline, and the parasympathetic, which is the brake pedal, which is the rest, digest, calm, relaxed.
Mm,
And so
mhm.
that's just a very simple tool that you can use to tip the scales more in that parasympathetic dominant state. And the reason why this is so important, I'm just going to put this out there, is
Yes.
that in order for men to get aroused, they need to be in a parasympathetic dominant state, right?
Mm,
So in order for us as men to get an erection and to stay hard and to not climax too quickly, we have to be more relaxed than stressed.
mhm.
And so a lot of complication happens for us when we're overly excited, overly stressed out, worried about how the interaction is going to go, because
Yes.
that moves the dial into this more stressed out state where you're breathing faster, right? You're
Mm,
elevating your breath rate, your heart rate is much faster. And
yep.
then because of that, your mind thinks that you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so it moves blood away from where you want it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
sends it to your core. And
Yep.
so what you want to start to do is start to use these breath practices where you can start to slow down and calm and relax, if that's something that you struggle with.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever experienced where it's like in the middle of things, you can notice a shift. Maybe they start worrying, your partner starts worrying about something, and the moment kind of changes. And it's like even sensing that switch can change that pretty
Mhm.
quickly, at least for me. Where it's like all of a sudden all of the sexual stuff just shuts down. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Are you okay? Because it
Yeah,
completely, yeah, it's pretty amazing how quickly that can shift without even realizing it if you're not aware of it.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think a big part of our work, especially in intimacy, is to be present to our own breath, our own body, right? What's happening within us? Because what most of us men do is we're very externally focused,
Mm.
right? And so we miss out on like what's happening inside of me right now, and
Yeah.
that can lead to a lot of stress. The other thing is that when we start to tune in to what we're experiencing internally, we just get stuck with our thoughts, right?
Hmm.
Is this going to go okay, right? So we start to self-reference, and
Mm.
that self-referencing is a boner killer, right? Because you're like, am I going to last long enough? Am I going to be hard enough? Is she going to
Yeah.
enjoy this? And we start
The
to go like,
insecurities are just like, yeah.
yeah, the insecurity is just ripping through. We're trying to go through the playbook of like, do I use this move first or that, rather than moving our consciousness down into our body, using our breath to feel in the moment of like, what do I desire right now? What do I want?
Hmm.
And tuning into our partner's body and their energy of what are they experiencing.
Yeah.
So yeah, the breath is one of the best tools to do to regulate.
Nice. That's great. I think one of the things that I don't know, I feel like probably a lot of men struggle with, but I struggle with is in that moment, right? When it switches, when a conversation switches from like conversation to conflict really,
Mm,
quickly, and it's like recognizing that feeling come up. And that's what I struggle with, I think, the most is when it happens and you can't recognize this switch because it happens very quickly, right?
totally.
And so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one of those things where we have to, we as men have to work to have more body awareness,
Mm.
right? Of like, what is happening outside of my thoughts in my mind? Because so many men feel trapped in their life because they're just trapped in their thoughts. They're not actually experiencing their wife or their girlfriend. They're not experiencing the conflict, and so they're
Mhm.
completely disconnected to, oh, I just felt a rush of anger, like,
Yeah.
oh, interesting, or oh, I just felt some embarrassment pop up, or oh, I
Mm.
feel defensiveness rising in my body. It's more this like, okay, she said this, now what do I say? And so
Mhm.
we have to work to bring some of our awareness and our consciousness more and more and more in any moment
Yeah.
down into our body of like, what am I actually, it's what I call the DFE, the direct felt experience, right? What is your direct felt experience? Not what are your thoughts about what's happening? What are you
Well,
experiencing about what's happening?
yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I wanted, if you're willing, or however much you have, I don't
Yeah. That was like, damn, that went quick.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing how fast an hour goes when like it's just the conversation is interesting. So
Yeah.
um but yeah, so I wanted to, if you're willing, I wanted to get a little bit into talking more about partners and that sort of thing. And so you and your wife are kind of like a self growth power couple. It's pretty cool. And I know she also just released a book recently, and you're both doing a lot of work and helping people to do this work.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you would be willing to share some of your greatest strengths and weaknesses as a couple and how you work with those together.
Yeah. I think one of our strengths now is that we're very proficient at moving through conflict in a way where resolution and repair happens.
Mm.
And so, one of the things that I write about in the book is like, find a woman that you can do conflict with, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with that person. And there's nothing more frustrating than picking a partner that you don't respect
Mm.
in the moments of conflict, or that you don't trust, or that
Mm.
you don't want to deal with. And so what I usually tell men is like, find women that you're okay with going through conflict with, because that's going to be a very important part of how you have a functional relationship. And honestly, the couples that we've worked with, because we've done a lot of work with couples, and like we have a workshop coming up in June, and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff that we do virtually and in person. The couples that have successful relationships, when conflict happens, they are able to move through it within like 24 to 36 hours,
Oh wow.
48 at max, right? And so there's like this flow of like, okay, something came up, we're going to talk about it, we're going to sort through it. If we can't, then we're going to pause, and then we're going to return to it, and we're going to find some resolution where we both understand one another, and we're
Yeah.
going to move through that conflict. And so I think one of the things that we do really well now, when we first got together, was a little bit more there was like the honeymoon phase, and then it was rocky for a little bit because we had different conflict styles.
Okay.
She's like the New Jersey, conflict oriented woman, right?
Yeah.
I joke around that in her family, conflict is like the sixth love language.
Yeah.
Where,
I
like,
heard you talking
they're,
about in that live yesterday too. That was great.
yeah, yeah,
But
where like they're just
yeah.
all okay with like going at each other. And I grew up in an environment where conflict was either something that you avoided or it was violent.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, but
Stark
I think
contrast.
that's, yeah, a big contrast. So I think that's one piece as we go through conflict really well. I think two, we have a really deep respect for one another, really deep respect for one another, and I think that that is absolutely paramount. If you're a man that's wanting to get into a relationship long term with a woman, and you're wanting to, engage the idea of getting married and stuff like that, my belief is that you need to have a deep respect for that person and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of our strengths. We have a really big respect for each other. I think the other strength is that we have worked very hard to support one another, and we do so in a really wonderful way,
Yeah.
where our relationship is a place for love and playfulness and
Mm,
fun and exploration, but it's also one of our core pillars of our marriage and of our relationship is expansion.
mm,
That we're both dedicated to knowing that part of the reason for our marriage is for us each individually to expand and for
yeah.
us as a couple to expand. So
Cool.
yeah, and then I think on the on the flip side of that, I mean, I think the main thing that we're always battling is we're both a little A type, and
Okay.
so left to our own devices we'll just build, create, do, like go constantly,
Yeah,
and live very sort of busy lives, which can be very exciting.
for sure.
um but I've also, I also just like doing nothing sometimes. And
Yeah.
so so I've really taken the lead on like, okay, I'm going to be responsible for the slowing down of our marriage and our relationship, and when our
Cool.
family's going to go do nothing, and when we're just going to go camp for a weekend, and when we're going to go on vacation, and those types of things, to make sure that we have time to ground down, to settle down.
Yeah, for sure. Do you
Yeah.
guys have do you find that you guys have, as more type A, do you have more conflicting like desires for how things should be that ever come to like head to head at all?
you know I think we're not type A in the sense that, like, I'm much more like relaxed about how things look around the house, as an example. I know that like a lot of sort of type A people can be very specific about how things are in the spaces and how things need to be done. And
Yeah,
that's not, like, for me, when I say that, I mean, I'm more like high functioning of, I
gotcha.
want to build, I want to create, I
Go,
want
go,
things to
go.
be
Yeah.
exceptional. I want to experience life and do some cool shit. And,
Yes.
so that if I died tomorrow, like, I know that I'm exiting this world having lived fully and pushed my edge.
You didn't die
Um,
watching reruns of the OC on Netflix.
yeah, like I don't even know what the OC is.
Yeah.
but um but yeah, so I think like we don't, there's this ongoing joke that, like, when my wife and I got together, I didn't rinse the forks and the knives, like the utensils, before I put them in the
Uh-huh.
dishwasher, and she would just like freak out about that. And so like it would cause conflict, because I'm like, no, like that's the dishwasher's job. Like the
It's for.
dishwasher's, it's literally a machine created to wash the fucking dishes. Like, why would I wash the utensils before I put them in the dishwasher?
Yeah,
And she's like, no, you got to rinse them, otherwise it doesn't work. And so,
yeah.
I think those things sometimes they pop up. They're real in relationships, but um I think the other thing is, I think one of the things that really keeps us together is, I have this saying that appreciation is the currency of intimacy.
Mm,
And it's just this notion that if you want intimacy to be alive in
mhm,
your marriage, if you want to really fertilize and create fertile ground for intimacy, whether that's emotionally or psychologically, spiritually, sexually, to blossom, that
mhm.
appreciation is the currency for that. And so I think one of the things that we also do well, but we've also had to work at, is really appreciating one another and what we're doing and what we bring to the table, and acknowledging one another for, small things and big things and everything in between. And I
Yeah.
think that if men took anything from this, conversation about relationships, what I would really hope that they take is that you create a culture of appreciation in your home, because it will change the dynamic with you and your kids. It'll change
Mm.
the dynamic with you and your wife and your partner or your girlfriend. And even within your work environment, it will change that
Mm.
culture.
Yep. Yeah, that's amazing. And, like you said in the beginning, building that appreciation for yourself is probably the best place to start to be able to appreciate
Yes.
others.
Yeah. You got to have a framework of self-recognition.
Right.
Otherwise, I mean, when we as men don't have an internal framework of self-recognition, we just need it. We try and get it from women, and
Mm.
we become the nice guy, the needy guy, the insecure guy, the like, I don't give a fuck guy. And
Yeah.
and it creates all kinds of problems. And so we have to be able to create this internal framework of self-recognition, of being able to acknowledge ourselves when we're doing things well. And that's
Yeah.
incredibly important. And guess what? It's attractive to women,
Yeah.
right? Women
Absolutely.
women love men who are able to, recognize and celebrate themselves,
Their own
without
greatness.
becoming, arrogant,
Yeah.
without
There's
becoming too arrogant.
come on.
It's a fine balance in that one.
For sure. Yeah. I actually just so I picked up I was like, all right, I'm gonna read this book before Connor and I have our conversation. And I was like, I want to get through it. And then I started reading it and I was just like, fuck, that's not gonna happen. It was like I have a tendency to prefer to digest things as I read
Mhm.
them. I don't like to just burn through something and not walk away with it with as much as I could take from it. And as I started reading this and how deep it gets, I found myself really marinating on the things that are talked about. And so I'm getting AVG interruptions here. um, so sorry, I'll cut this out.
All good, man. I had the camera issues coming in, and you got them going out.
Right. So anyway, yeah, I've been taking more time to work through it because you have all these great activities in here that really help to dig deeper and really understand like what's actually going on with these concepts. So I just got to the section on self-talk, and how we treat ourselves. And the comment in there about when you did the workshop and you did the activity where you told guys to talk to other guys the way they talk to themselves when something goes wrong, I was
Mhm.
just like, shit. Like I would never talk to somebody the way that I talk to myself sometimes over stupid things,
That's it.
like I drop something and I'm like, oh, you fucking idiot or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
like, why do I talk to myself that way? And
Yep.
so, and I don't believe that. I don't believe I'm an idiot, but like I still say those things under my breath or in my head, when I do something. And so yeah, that's a really cool concept. Just learning how to change that self-talk. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a big one. After I've been working with men for a decade now from all over the world, and I think one of the things that I've taken away from that, one of the things that I've really learned is like, majority of men are beating the shit out of themselves internally on a daily basis,
Mhm.
and that, that can't can't not have a damaging effect on how you relate and interact to other people. How you interact with other people is often an extension of how you treat yourself. And so if you're wanting a better relationship with your wife or your girlfriend or your kids, your colleagues or your friends, like, you do have to start by building a more robust relationship with yourself, because that's who they're interacting with, right? And if you're somebody who's just constantly, beating themselves up every day and talking down to yourself, um, it's going to be hard for you to really take in the compliments that other people give you. It's going
Mhm.
to be hard for you to really receive the love that you want from your partner. or from your kids. And
Yeah.
so I think we have to work diligently to do that. And I think one of the parts of the book that guys have been getting a lot out of is that reframing and the sort of tactical approach of how to deal with that inner self-talk and
Mm,
to frame that in a different way. And I mean, that changed my life, honestly. Like, no,
yeah.
it's not an exaggeration. Like, when I shifted the way that I talked to myself, it changed my life, because I used to berate myself.
Mm,
I was abusive towards myself. The way that I talked to myself was brutal, man. It was
yeah.
brutal.
Mm,
And, I think it really breaks my heart that I interact with so many men who are talking to themselves that way. And if I do nothing, in my life, but change the way that thousands or tens of thousands of men speak to themselves, I feel like I will have done something meaningful with my life.
absolutely. That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I usually wrap up with asking what's one thing that you would one piece of life advice that you would give everybody listening. So, and I know you already mentioned building a framework or building a foundation of appreciation. But do you have kind of a general theme for yourself, like a main thing that you like to tell yourself that you would give as one piece of life advice?
Hmm. Hmm.
I know there's so many things.
Well, I think I think I've learned a lot over the years, and I'm not really too sure if there's one piece of life advice, and I'm kind of stalling to to come
Yeah,
up with
yep.
something.
That's a hard
But
one.
I think the best advice that I could give is, pursue sitting around men who you aspire to be,
Mm,
and really take that seriously, because you know our culture is bereft and sort of void of healthy masculine energy, and it needs
mm,
it desperately. And I think that we as men want it, and we're craving it, and we're desiring it. And so, I would say, do everything in your power to spend more time with men that you aspire to be, and men that inspire you,
mm.
and see them, and model it, and learn from them, and ask them questions. uh your life just will always be better because of that. At least that's been my lesson. The more that I've sat with men that I aspire to be when I'm 70 and
Yep.
when I'm 80, it's like, the more I feel grounded in appreciating who I am as a father, and as a husband, and as a business leader and business owner.
Mm.
So yeah, there we go. Found it. We found it.
Yes. Pay close attention to the company you keep for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. That's a really, yeah, great thing to leave it with, man. And with that, it's last call. So, last call is your opportunity to tell everybody where they can find you, what you've got going on, like your workshops that you've got coming up. So yeah, tell them how they can get involved and all that.
Yeah, I mean, you could just go to mantalks.com. The book is there. The men's weekends that I host in person are there. The online groups that I run something called the Men's Self Leadership Program, that's there, and the Alliance is there. And then it's just at Man Talks on all the social media channels. I got a good YouTube channel. I'm starting to put out all my podcasts and conversations and content there. And I'm also very, very active on Instagram. So you can just go on IG, at Man Talks.
Cool. Perfect.
Yeah.
Love that, man. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really great conversation. I appreciate you.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.